half-cock notches, so I'm actually going to point those out to you. On the hammer, these kind of jagged edges, the first one is the quarter-cock notch. So as you're cocking the hammer, you hear that first click. That is the sear portion of the trigger, which is now broken, locking into that little recess. Your second click is the half-cock notch, so that's that second jagged edge. And then your last click is the actual sear notch. So that's where the trigger is sitting when the hammer is in its fully cocked position. So when I struck the hammer with the mallet, it actually broke off that piece of the trigger that was sitting up against the hammer there.
And is there anything unusual to you in this photo about the full cock notch on the hammer?
So again, this notch here is the full cock notch. So you may notice when looking at this that this notch appears much flatter when you compare it to the other two notches. So it could be that a small portion of this surface was also damaged during the testing. But in addition to that, there are times where the sear notch is just not as pronounced as the other two notches. So I didn't observe any damage myself in this particular area, but it's possible that that area was damaged as well.
And based on your testing, did you form an opinion about whether or not this gun could be fired without the handler pulling the trigger?
So again, the only two times that occurred was with the hammer at rest on a loaded chamber, and the second time I attributed this to the breakage of internal components. So again, if these parts had not broken, I would expect that the trigger should have been caught by either the quarter or the half-cock notch as the hammer was coming forward. So I would not expect this to occur had this breakage not happened.
So just to be clear, did you form an opinion about whether the handler would have to pull the trigger of the gun to make the gun fire?
My opinion is that the only reason this occurred is because of the breakage. So in order to move the trigger away from the hammer, that's typically accomplished by pulling the trigger. So in this case, the only way that was possible is because the trigger actually fractured.
Okay. So in order for you, just so that we're clear, in order for you to make the gun fire without pulling the trigger, when it was in the full cock position, you had to break it.
That's what I had to do in my lab. I can't account for all the other possibilities that may have existed in some hypothetical scenario, but this is the result as I tested it in my laboratory. It would not fire without pulling the trigger in the full cock setting without being broken.
Thank you. Let's move to State's Exhibit 98. Can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Yes, this is a photograph of the fired bullet that was submitted for comparison.
And can you describe to us in a little bit more detail what we're seeing in this photo?
This is the lead bullet that was submitted. It's very damaged. So typically when I look at a fired bullet, I would expect to see nice areas that are engraved with the negative impression of the barrel. So I'd expect to see, for example, deep lines that define what we call the rifling. And in this case, I don't see that. I just see a series of abrasions on the outside of this bullet. So essentially, whatever this bullet came into contact with, it basically damaged the exterior surface so greatly that the information that was left behind from the barrel is gone.
When you're talking about what the bullet came in contact with, I just want to be clear, are you talking about what the bullet came in contact with after it left the barrel of the gun?
That's correct.
State's Exhibit 99. Explain to us what we're looking at here.
So these are just additional images of the same fired bullet. So I took these using my microscope, so they're a little bit higher magnification. And basically, in both of these photos, the bullet is pointing to the left. So you're looking at the image of the left, you're looking at all of the damage and abrasions that were present on that bullet when I received it. And the image on the right is similar to the one you saw on the previous slide, where it doesn't have the deep gouges in different directions, but the rifling is still virtually gone from this bullet.
Can you tell us what caliber this bullet is?
When we receive fired bullets, the only way we can estimate the caliber is based on the diameter, so I can measure the diameter of the bullet, and also the bullet weight. So for those two items, they were very close between a .44 caliber and a .45 caliber bullet. So I classified it as either a .44 or .45 caliber bullet.
Can you explain to us why a .45 caliber bullet, by the time it gets to you, may have a different diameter and weight?
Sure, so this projectile is lead, which is a relatively soft material. Most modern bullets are going to have a harder jacketing material, so it's going to have a lead core with a harder jacket around it. The most common type is going to be copper, and that harder material is going to protect the lead core. It's going to help it keep its mass as it starts hitting things. But because this is lead, it's relatively soft, it's much more susceptible to damage when it hits things. So it's possible that when I receive a bullet or even a bullet fragment and I go to take a measurement of that bullet, it may be less than the true measurement because it's hit things and I now only have a partial bullet. Or conversely, it could actually be a wider diameter because it hits something and it flattens, so that causes it to expand. So that's why when I'm taking that measurement into consideration, I may not be able to narrow it down to just one specific caliber.
And State's Exhibit 100, what's this?
These are two images of the fired cartridge case that was submitted for the examination. So the left image is from the side, and the right image you're looking at what's called the head stamp of the cartridge. So the head stamp itself is the outer ring where you're going to see information such as the caliber. So 45 Colt is the caliber. You may also see symbols which relate to the manufacturer. And then this silver colored surface in the center here is the primer that I've been talking about. So this is what the firing pin comes into contact with when you pull the trigger. So this crater in the center, that's the firing pin impression. So when the firing pin falls, strikes the primer, it leaves behind an impression of the firing pin. And also during the firing process, the cartridge case rests up against a flat surface called the breech face. And during the firing process, this cartridge case slams into the breech face, and it can pick up an impression of imperfections on that surface. So you may see some parallel lines. Some of these lines are kind of arcing. They almost appear to be crosshatch. Again, there's more parallel lines on the left here. That's an impression that this cartridge case has picked up from the breech face of the firearm.
Did you compare this casing with anything else, any other casings?
This was the only fired cartridge case that was submitted, but I did compare it to those known specimens that I collected from the revolver that was submitted.
And the known specimens, are those the ones that you fired out of the revolver yourself?
That's correct. That's the secondary evidence that I spoke about earlier. So I created that evidence in the lab by physically test firing the gun, and they became my knowns at that point.
Did you form an opinion about whether or not this cartridge casing was fired from the gun that we saw in the earlier exhibits?
Yes, it's my opinion that I identified this cartridge case as having been fired by the revolver.
State's Exhibit 101. What are we looking at here?
So these are representative images of the comparison that I did to get to that conclusion of identification. So if you look at the image on the left, this is two cartridge cases being compared side by side, and this is on my what's called comparison microscope. So at the laboratory I have this microscope. I can mount two specimens. There are two separate microscopes connected by an optical bridge, and there's a binocular eyepiece at the top. So when I look through that binocular eyepiece, I can see images of both specimens side by side.
The next picture down looks pretty much the same, but it's not. The hammer is about 1/8 of an inch rearward, and now it has engaged an internal mechanism, a safety notch. So now the hammer and firing pin cannot reach a live cartridge. The third picture down is the loading position, also known as half cock. The previous position could be called, and is often called, quarter cock. At that half cock position, the third picture down, the cylinder, which capable of holding 6 cartridges, is now free to rotate. Prior to this, in the upper two pictures, it was locked and secured by a small latch that we can't see in these pictures. The final picture, and the most important one, the hammer is at the full cock, ready to fire position. You can now see the firing pin in the hammer, that it's fully rearward, and it's staying there. That will be important later.
And if you would, describe for us what the firearm is that you have in front of you. Is that this exact gun?
It's the brother to the evidence gun. Same make, model, caliber. It's just not the evidence gun.
And would you demonstrate for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury the different positions, and also specifically the half-cock position and the rotation of the cylinder?
Sure. Well, I checked it, but again, just so everyone feels as comfortable as they're going to be around a firearm.
Hang on just a second.
You should probably stand in the middle.
Yeah, do you want to stand? And
Sure.
That would be great.
I'm left-hand dominant, so I have to explain that. The hammer is fully down. If there were a live cartridge in this gun, the firing pin would be resting right against it. So this is an unsafe carry position if it were a loaded gun. It would also be the position if I had just fired it. There would be a spent cartridge. The firing pin would be deep into the primer of that cartridge. You can also see if the trigger is back. Now when I pull it, there. That's the safety position. Very little movement, but the hammer is now about 1/8 of an inch rearward. The trigger has just popped forward, so it's got an internal spring that is resetting. Cylinder is still locked up, cannot rotate. Now when I pull it to the load position, you may have seen the cylinder rotate already. It's free to rotate now. The little latch that I mentioned, which we can't see, has been pulled down by that motion. There's a loading gate here on the side that's opened, and this is where I would either remove fired cartridges or place live cartridges, up to a total of 6. After loading it, fully loading it, I close that gate. And I have 2 choices. If I'm ready to shoot, I'm going to cock it. And if I've decided what I'm going to shoot at is to be shot at, pull the trigger. Hammer falls off of a ledge, a little notch. Actually, it's more of a step on the hammer. So now we're back to where we were a moment ago. If I'm going to fire it again, pull it all the way back. Hammer stays in position, which we saw in the photographs, which again is important because when we get to the damage that occurred with the gun, the hammer won't stay there. If I'm going to let it down, if I'm going to render this gun safe, I decide I'm not going to shoot. I do have to pull the trigger, but I get my thumb firmly on this spur. Pull the trigger, let it down. Once I get past the halfway point, I can let go of the trigger and it engages a safety notch again. So there's all the steps. It's called a single action probably heard that term a couple of times, because pulling the trigger accomplishes one single thing. It fires the gun.
In terms of, sorry, in terms of that loading gate and the loading of the gun, if you were to show me the primers and the head stamps of the rounds that you have in the gun, and we know that there are none, but this is, we're just going to play pretend. Show me how you would show me what's in that gun.
Well, I bring it up, no one downrange.
Here, maybe we go this way so that
I bring
where's
the
loading
hammer
gate?
to
Yeah.
half cock.
Okay.
We want to show the jury.
Let's go over here. So they can see behind
okay.
us. There we go.
She used a term, an industry term, the head stamp. It's what's written on the cartridge, and in the middle of which is a primer. So if she wanted to see, or any of you wanted to see, are there fired cartridges in here, live cartridges, all 6? I just rotate the cylinder, and we go a couple of times around, see if there are any empty chambers, or fired cartridges, or live rounds. If we wanted to take them out, if they're live, you just dump them out. If they're fired, you need this ejection rod here to knock a spent cartridge out because it's expanded.
So if you were to show me the rounds that you have in the gun in this manner, I can only see the head stamp and primer of one cartridge at a time.
That's right. In this view from behind the gun with the gate open.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Can I
And have a
take my seat?
Yes. So, thank you. Is there anything else that you can think of from the documents that you reviewed that contributed to your opinion that the gun was in proper working order when it was received at the FBI?
Yes, the examiner was able to fire at least 12 live cartridges for comparison purposes to recover bullets in fired cartridge cases. The gun had to be in working order to do that. Had it been in the condition I later found it, you wouldn't have been able to do that.
And the condition that you later found it, can you just kind of describe what was wrong with it when you took it into evidence? And I'm going to pull an 8 up. This is going to be an exhibit that's already entered into evidence, Exhibit 97A.
It had been partially disassembled. It was in a gun box with some ties.
I'm working on it.
I think she wants to use the,
Hang on. Pardon me, where's my... Okay. If you can use this as an aid and sir, your screen, you can, use it to draw lines and all
Okay.
kinds of stuff.
So it's a touch screen.
It is, if you need some assistance.
This is one of the many FBI pictures, and you're looking at 3 parts of the gun. The obvious one's the hammer.
he's going to show you how to mark it and get rid of it.
How do I erase it? Okay. The hammer's pretty obvious. Here's the firing pin. I really wanted to make a circle. It's making arrows. Can it? You tricked me.
He wants
we're looking at the hammer, and I'm really pressing hard. The hammer, the important part of the hammer are these notches you can see here. There's two clear notches. Something goes in them. Well, one of them is the safety position. The next one is the load position. The one that's very difficult to see, and I almost obliterated it, is down at the bottom of my circle. That's where the full cock step would be, but it's been peened, P-E-E-N-E-D. It's been knocked off, rounded off, and is full of very rough tool marks. The piece that would fit into each one of those is the trigger. And the trigger is the black piece here, but the tip of the trigger in the industry is called the sear, S-E-A-R. That's the piece that goes in those three locations. And it really rests on this step when it's in the full cock position. So that's somewhat tenuous, and the pulling of the trigger causes it to slide off, the hammer to fall. There's a little piece in that circle I just drew. That's the broken off sear of the trigger. So it's an incomplete trigger. And finally, the object up here has two names. The company that makes this reproduction gun calls it the bolt, B-O-L-T. I've always called it a cylinder stop latch. It was the thing that was securing the cylinder in the safety position, in the full cock position, but not in a loading position. The left side of that goes up into the notches in the cylinder for those previous positions and drops down and allows the cylinder to rotate in the load position. So looking at those both photographically and in person, I could see that the full cock step or notch on the hammer was broken away, beaten away, or knocked away. Kind of hard to describe it if you don't see it under the microscope. And the sear was broken off, and the stop latch, the little wings, there's two pieces that protrude out. That also was broken, and the gun can't work in the normal fashion if it had been that way on the movie set.
And based on your document review, do you have an opinion about how the bolt, the trigger sear, and the hammer were damaged? What took place that caused that damage?
The hammer had to be in the full cock position, and one or more substantial blows, impacts to the hammer, because it's just sitting, the sear and the trigger and the full cock notch are just sitting there engaged with each other, and it's a small area. So if you give a substantial blow, one or more, to the back of the hammer, it is stressing that area, and it will finally, and did finally, fail. And I can see under the microscope a lot of very rough tool marks where it's just rolled over and rounded off. It's no longer a step. It's a rounded area which cannot retain the trigger even if it was intact.
What's your understanding of the circumstances of the blows you're talking about?
As I understood reading the examiner's notes and report, it was an evaluation of whether this gun was prone to accidental discharge by an impact to the hammer.
Okay, we're going to look at a few other photos here. Before I take this photo down, I'm going to pause. Yeah.
Council approach.
Mr. Haig, let's shift gears for just a moment. Based on everything that you reviewed, and also the examination and the firing of this gun that you yourself participated in, have you seen any evidence that the full cock hammer notch was filed or modified to allow faster shooting?
No.
Thank you, sir. I'm showing you what has been marked as State's Exhibit 134. Can you explain to the jury what we're looking at here?
Yes, you're looking at two triggers from a Colt reproduction single action revolver. The lower one is from probably the very pistol that's here today. It was a new Pieta Colt single action that my younger son owns. So that's the way it should look. The one above is the broken damage trigger, and the tip of the sear is not even present in this picture. So that area that's missing, just trying to get the hang of this, it's right there.
Okay. And I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 137. Can you tell us what that is?
Yes, this is a view through an instrument called a stereo microscope to which a camera's been attached, and you're looking at a putting back together, so to speak, like a broken teacup, where I'm putting the two parts together, and all that roughness you see there are manufacturing marks. Those aren't breakage marks, but just when they made the part on the one side of it, it's been machined, and under the microscope you can see those lines. So if you look at that, you can sort of see the contour agrees, and if we put them, my son and I put them right back together, you just see a faint line. So we deliberately pulled them apart a little bit so you can see they're two pieces, not just a crack in a piece.
So just to be clear, what we're looking at here in State's Exhibit 137 is the trigger with the top part of the sear, and then the part of the sear that was broken off. Is that right?
Yes, two pictures back. If you remember, there was a little piece of metal off to one side and the trigger with a piece missing. That's what you're looking at here. Those have been put back together, are brought close together under the microscope.
And this is just a demonstration that the piece of the sear that broke off fits back on to the trigger sear mechanism, sort of like pieces of a puzzle.
Yes.
Okay.
That it's not ground off or rounded off, it's snapped off, it's broken off.
State's Exhibit 138, can you tell us what we're looking at here?
Again, you're looking through the microscope at the evidence hammer as I saw it, and this area, try to do this a little better, that's where there should be a nice right angle step, and there isn't. It's just rounded off toward the right. The other two are the load notch, and they truly are notches, and the quarter cock or safety notch. But the circled area should not look like that. There's no step there at this point.
And it's your opinion that that was shaved off during the aggressive testing at the FBI?
Yes.
State's Exhibit 139, can you tell us what we've got here?
Counsel, may I ask, were these introduced? Were they admitted
Yes,
earlier?
I believe so. I asked to admit
130 through 146. Okay, thank you.
got it, okay. Go ahead, sir.
You're looking at four hammers in sort of an oblique view. Three of them, my younger son and I provided. I bought two. He took one out of the revolver you saw here today. But the one here is the evidence hammer. And if you look across at the other three, you can see that they're visually quite different.
I'm going to play for you State's Exhibit 59. which is going to be from that collection.
There was one additional.
Stop. 159. I apologize.
There was one additional video in that exhibit. Are we continuing on with the behind the scenes now?
No, I was gonna move us to the Rust
Okay.
Productions videos.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Okay.
Well, just a minute. So did you publish 158? I guess is the question. Is that what the question is?
Yes, I published 158. Now we're moving on to 159.
Okay.
And Mr. Carpenter, I think I understand your question. Let's go ahead and move on to these.
Copy that.
Okay.
Mark? Set, ready, and action. One more. I forgot the recoil stuff. No, right away. Let's reload. Here we go. So, Halyna. Hi. What? Here we go. Come on.
Well, I had to go closer because Danny did, so. You want...
We should have had two guns and both were reloading.
And hang on just a second. I think at the beginning, for some reason, what I want to show you is out of this frame. Bear with me. Mr. Bowe, how can I do frame by frame? Okay. Okay. Let me see if I can get to what I wanted to visit with you about. And for the record, I'm just fast forwarding frame by frame. Sorry, that takes a long time. I apologize. Let me ask you this. Mr. Lewis, do you see the issue?
I do.
Okay.
I think
You're going to help me fix that?
I am.
Okay. But for the purposes of this, just so that we can move on, have you seen this video where the frame is a little bit bigger and you can see someone over on the far right side of the frame, and I can't play it on that?
I know.
Okay.
I just want to make sure this is the right thing you're looking for.
Yeah, that's it. Okay. We'll swap it out. I'm gonna show you the one that has the wider frame. I apologize for that error, but we'll go ahead and go through your testimony now. So the other wider frame of this video, what do you see over on the right hand side?
Well, you have two cameras operating in that particular scene. If it's the one I'm thinking of, you've got an A cam and a B cam, meaning they're filming it from two different locations. So you're actually seeing from one of the camera angles that has an entire operating crew behind it, which will have a first aid, so they'll have a camera operator, etc., behind that camera. So imagine a crew of people, a few people behind that camera, and then you've got the other camera that you're actually seeing in frame being filmed. And a lot of times in an action sequence, they'll film it from two different angles, so you can cut and chop it up in editorial. So that's what you're going to be seeing if it's the video that I'm remembering correctly.
Okay, and the gentleman here will pull it and we'll play it. Generally speaking, and we're going to play the other video. Well, you know what? Let's move to the. I think this is. I don't recall if this is Cam A or Cam B. Oh, okay. They're keeping me straight here. Let's see.
Hey, Mark. There you go, Mark. Set, ready, and action.
What's happening there? Do you see this over on the right here?
So keep in mind, as I said previously, you will see a camera crew operating, and he's doing what's called a handheld right there. He's hand holding the camera and moving it, meaning it's not on a dolly or a track or anything of that nature. So that camera operator's hand holding that piece of equipment with operators behind him. Remember that the frame that you're seeing here has that exact same situation going on as well behind this. So it's a number of people out here, both behind that camera and behind the one that we're seeing POV from, okay? And that appears to be a full flash blank just from the report, the amount of powder that's leaving the barrel, the amount of report and gun smoke that's coming out. I would imagine that's a full flash blank. And one of the first rounds that he fired actually incapacitated the camera and operator in the smoke, meaning he was entirely too close to that camera to fire that. We have a minimum amount of distance that is required for safety when you're firing blanks, depending on what type of blank you're firing, and that was well within the safety zone.
And let's say you're wrong. Let's say that wasn't a full load blank. Let's say it was a half load or a quarter load. How does that? Well, let me stop for just a second and let me ask you this. Can you explain to the jury, talk to them a little bit about blank rounds and whether or not blank rounds can be dangerous?
Sure. So a few years back, the local 600, which is a camera union, and the gentleman that works in that union, he's one of their business reps, asked me to do a soft tissue video series showing the effects of soft tissue from blanks. A tomato is a very good example of the human skin from a very non-scientific standpoint, right? But the internal part of a tomato and the external being the skin tissue is a very good example. So we took a tomato and at different distances fired quarter flash, half flash, full flash blanks at that tomato in high-speed cameras to show the effects of it. You also get down to blanks that get into 1.8, 1.6, 2.3, but that's really, really small things that just make the firearm operate if it's a semi or fully automatic, and not something that we would be dealing with here. So getting back to your point directly, we did that video series, and a full flash blank from the distance of easily 6 feet to 8 feet can peel the skin off and do damage, trauma to the inside of it. Half flash blank at 4 to 6 feet, so forth and so on. Again, not an exact distance ratio to hear it today in court, but well within any distance that's being fired there would have done damage to human tissue if it would hit it. And you can almost assuredly say that was a full flash blank from the distance of the report. You can see the smoke travel from the muzzle, which is the area of the firearm where a projectile technically would come out, from the muzzle end of that weapon to the end of that initial smoke stream, which if you had a high-speed enough camera, you would see fire in there as well. It's gunpowder burning inside of that smoke. You can see that it's all the way to the camera, which is approximately, I would say that's about 8 feet, 7 to 8 feet.
Is there any, when a blank is fired, is it possible that something is expelled from the firearm?
There is things expelled from the firearm. Now, movie blanks are a bit different than, say, a military blank because they're meant to be shot in closer proximities, et cetera, and you want all the particulates inside of the casing, i.e. the gunpowder, anything inside of there, to completely and totally burn up, almost like magic powder. You've seen the magicians throw the thing and all that paper burns up instantaneously. Something to the effect of that. You would want it all to burn up as quickly as possible the minute it is ignited and leaves the muzzle of that weapon. Okay, so there is a little bit of difference. However, it still sends unburnt powder and particulates out of that muzzle, which can put an eye out, burn the skin, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Not to mention the concussive force of it alone.
Okay, so I'm going to get to that frame right there. Specifically that frame, what's concerning?
Well, he's within, outside of the bounds of safe distance. In other words, he's well within the no-go zone there, and he's pointing and firing the weapon directly at camera. Now, there are particular scenes which are set up in a very specific and controlled manner that you can, point at or near camera. But for the most part, you always instruct any of your performers to always aim off camera. Never aim directly at somebody, aim directly off of them, even if it's 4 or 5 inches or a foot or two, right? Now, I'm just speaking with an empty weapon that's already been cleared, not to mention a blank, where this is not even what we're talking about now. When you just generally aim a weapon, cheat it to the side a little bit. But in this particular case, we're firing the blank. You would want to have 4 feet off camera angle that he should be shooting to the side, and keep in mind no camera crew behind there as well. That entire right hand side or right camera of where he's shooting should be completely clear of any personnel, and he should be shooting at least 4 feet off to the right of that camera, and he should be at least 21 feet away.
Okay.
One more. I forgot the recoil stuff. No, right away. Let's reload. Here we go.
So, Halyna. Hi.
How many movie sets do you think you've worked on in your career?
100.
That conduct that we're seeing on the part of Mr. Baldwin, is that typical conduct from an actor on a movie set?
No.
Why not?
Well, number one, he's basically instructing the armor how to do their job at that point, telling them that we should have had the gun second reload, hurry up, give it to me, fast. This is that moment. This is that moment I spoke about earlier. This is that moment that you need to stop and say, no, I'm not going to hurry up, I'm going to slow down. And we don't need to be, passing off weapons this fast or loading guns this fast. This is creating an unsafe and nerve-wracking situation, to describe it in more layman's terms. Always on any kind of live training exercise, military training or whatnot, you don't want to put people in a nervous position. That creates, now you can stress, it's a level of stress that's necessary in realism training for military and law enforcement. This is not that.
So, was it your expectation that Mr. Baldwin should have been detained? Do you believe that they should have detained him?
I do.
And do you believe that they should have put him in a police car and taken his phone away?
Not necessarily placed in a police car, but he should have been segregated from the other witnesses, and his phone should have been taken to preserve evidence.
Don't you agree with me that there has to be probable cause that there may be evidence on the phone before the phone can be taken?
But they wouldn't know if there was going to be evidence on the phone without interviewing him. There was no other way to know whether there was evidence on that phone or not. But he was on the phone when law enforcement arrived, so who was he talking to?
Well, did you look at his call logs?
That's after the fact. I'm talking about when deputies arrived at the scene.
Okay, I appreciate that, but what I'm trying to figure out is what about your concerns actually turned out to be real issues with the investigation? What evidence was missing or hidden by Mr. Baldwin? What evidence do you have?
We don't have the full contents of his phone.
Has the defense filed any kind of a motion in this case to try to get the full contents of his phone?
That I don't know.
And you understand, though, that a full extraction of Mr. Baldwin's phone was done in New York, but we were given a limited report. You understand that?
Yes, I do.
And you also understand that originally the same thing happened with Ms. Gutierrez. A limited report was generated from a full extraction, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you agree with me that defense counsel is free to issue subpoenas and file motions to compel and do all of those things in a case if they feel that they're missing evidence?
Yes, I'm aware of that.
So do you think that it would have been appropriate then for law enforcement to take Ms. Gutierrez's phone away from her and not let her make a phone call to her mother?
That can be monitored also. I've seen it done both ways. I've seen them taken away where they're not allowed to make any phone calls, and I've also seen where they've been able to make a call in the presence of law enforcement.
Sir, generally in your experience as a law enforcement officer, do you usually continue to investigate an individual for a crime after you have, let's say for months, after you have been unable to develop a single lead that that person was involved? Do you need me to rephrase that question?
I think I understand your question. You're saying, do you continue an investigation of someone that you have no information to
Yeah,
believe
right.
they committed a crime?
You looked, you executed a search warrant, you interviewed the person numerous times, and you just simply don't have any evidence that they were involved. At some point, don't they just not become a suspect anymore?
I don't know if that's the correct phrase, but
What
your
would be correct?
your investigation is over. You've taken the investigation as far as you can go.
Right.
Right.
So at some point with Mr. Kinney, they executed a search warrant, they interviewed him numerous times, and they didn't come up with anything. So what do you think they should have done to continue?
At that point, there wasn't much further they could go.
And, sir, are you aware that the FBI will not do DNA testing on rounds, whether they're spent or unspent? Were you aware of that?
I heard about it in this case, but they have done DNA testing on casings, unspent casings.
Well, weren't you present? Were you present for a pretrial interview of the DNA expert in this case?
I was.
And you heard her during the interview state that they won't do this kind of DNA testing, correct?
I did.
All right.